Welcome to the 11th episode of the Filip The Terran podcast, where I interviewed Tyler Wood, a very successful individual who's the director of multiple companies, all of which share the same goal and mission to create a more sustainable planet and a future for all of humanity. He's a very, very knowledgeable individual, someone who has worked in the hedge fund industry for multiple decades. He is used to solving problems at the highest economic level. He really understands how our system works and really knows what is needed in order to fix it. So we went deep into a lot of these new horizon technologies that will have a big impact on the environment, and that includes blockchain, that includes carbon capture and carbon mining. A lot of new things I learned from this podcast, and I think you will also. I really highly recommend you listen to him, and you also check him out on LinkedIn. His name is Tyler Wood, really brilliant individual, and I was very honored to have him on the podcast. So I hope you enjoy. Hello, Tyler.
Hey, Philip, how you doing?
Very good. How are you? How was your week?
Oh, it's good. It's busy. I was speaking at the 21st annual Wall Street Green Summit yesterday, and it was pretty exciting. There was a lot of people that had registered, some incredible, thought leaders in the sustainability space, and I was in the Climate Tech Solutions Day, so it was pretty fun. I wasn't familiar with this format, so I had to, get my backgrounds and all this stuff, situated. So,
yeah, that's great.
How have you been?
Fantastic. I had a great week at work, especially Tree Nation. I think that we've had amazing progress since we last spoke. We recruited a new sales and marketing director, like a very, very key hire, and we're really starting to scale faster and faster. Things are going really, really well. We went out actually for team building last night, right? So I'm a little bit in bad shape because we went drinking, we went to a restaurant and stuff, but it was so fun. It's a lot of pleasure to see a team. For so long, it's been like 4 or 5 of us here. Now we're nearly 20, and this is in the course of just a couple of months. Like now we're just like expanding and scaling really exponentially. So loads of fun, and the weather just got better in Barcelona. So very positive.
Good. Yeah, I was just thinking you're still in Barcelona. That's great. Yeah, I think planet repair is going to be one of the biggest new industries on the planet. We've spent 200 years trashing the place, and now we're going to start repairing it. And it's going to be the great untrashing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think sustainability is going to be one of the biggest industries, very similar in size, probably to the finance industry. Probably not as big, but I think it's kind of a similar thing in a sense. It's kind of like finance is like you're exchanging value, and sustainability is just attaching something more to that value. I mean, what do you think about that?
Creating more value than just dollars and cents.
Exactly, but you have to connect it to everything, right? So this is because that's the whole idea that the whole economy is going to be
Well, I think GDP. I think the realization that GDP is a horrible metric for measuring progress. If you've got a fantastic GDP and then half your citizenry is like suffering from like post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, then you're not creating value; you're robbing it.
Exactly. I think it's about finding some kind of scale for the average happiness of an individual. It's like that's really the idea, right? So we have to figure out some kind of way to do that. Also in a long term way, right? Because a lot of people might be happy in a short term way, in an unsustainable way, right? And that might lead to problems down the line. I definitely agree.
Well, I've heard, a lot of people have said it, but the biggest challenges are oftentimes our biggest opportunities. And there's only 8.6% of the world economy is circular. So there's a lot of room.
Whoa, that's crazy.
There's a lot of room.
That's a crazy percentage. It's very low. It's so low. It's kind of like a bit mind blowing, don't you think? Like we've been doing this for so long, and it's kind of just like how like it just shows you human nature, like how everybody, doesn't matter your position, age, or net worth, like they just under the carpet, right? Yeah. Under the carpet with problems, and we've been doing that for our whole history.
It's called the Circularity Gap, and trying to go from that 8.6 to 50. But that's going to be a massive shift, and what we're doing with our Carbotura zero fill of eliminating, municipal waste without having to separate all the different plastics and all the biomass and all the stuff. It's literally if we've had recycling for this long and only 10% has been recycled, then it's not a solution. It's a failed marketing campaign. You have to really start rethinking recycling at the nano level, and that's what we do with Gravitas, our subsidiary Carbotura, and that's a really big kind of game changer for the world, because I think everyone's kind of exhausted separating their trash, knowing that it's all going to go in the landfill, or 90% of it. It's like it's practice of futility. So, but the interesting part of it is that there's a tremendous expense to all of that separation of all that trash. And if you're going to process it at the nano level, you don't have to separate all of it, any of it. It just, it gets kind of filtered off as it gets processed. And so you have 100% recycling of all municipal solid waste. And that includes biomass waste streams. So I was invited to speak at the UN next month to talk about hemp and growing hemp. And I think that that's a phenomenal new commodity crop. But here in the US, they passed the Farm Bill in 2018. And that was a boon for people. People are planting hemp all over the country. There was like billions, over $6 billion in hemp just rotting in the fields because they didn't have the infrastructure to process that biomass. And so zero fill ultimately becomes that infrastructure that's necessary to process all that biomass. So it doesn't have to be just all municipal waste. It could be, separate lines of just biomass coming in, and the outputs of that are quite valuable because they're carbon negative attributes rather than processing semi-processed hydrocarbons. You're processing biocarbons, which are carbon negative, and so you come out with renewable synthesis gas, biogas, biofuels, and the biochar. The biochar can be further processed with advanced processing to activated carbon, to graphite, graphene, and even diamonds. So these agricultural companies or agricultural countries could see a huge increase in their revenues because we don't charge. We're going in saying, look, if we can guarantee a certain amount of volume per day of waste, anywhere from 500 tons to 10,000 tons, we'll come in no expense, no out-of-pocket expense for that municipality or those people that are dealing with those waste streams. And we'll process 100% of it, and we'll share those revenues, with those people. That's a multi-generational revenue stream for municipalities around the world. So, and we're talking for 2,000 tons a day of municipal waste, on average, like $80 to $90 million a year in revenues.
It's incredible.
It's multi-generational. So it turns what is typically, 20 to 50% of their municipal budget into a revenue stream. And we don't want to disintermediate, the waste handlers or anything like that. We don't charge any tipping fees. We just take it for free and become a virtual landfill. So that's kind of an exciting area of what we're focusing on right now, because we're scaling that globally. Got about 17 or so. We're in well over a dozen with our working team for people that have immediate need for getting rid of municipal waste, or extending the life of landfills or eliminating landfills for that matter. We go right in and mine landfills. And get rid of them, turn them into soccer fields or turn them into something that's nice and have it completely remediated.
It's amazing. I have a question that already popped up as you were saying, this part, and also as you were saying previously about things like the plastic industry, I mean, recycling industry, and generally that only about 8.7%, as you said, of our entire system is sustainable. And the thought that already pops into my head that I really would love your opinion on is, do you agree with the, let's say, statement or proposition that a lot of these problems exist, right, because of a lack of transparency, right, within industries, where there's just oversight from consumers is nearly impossible in some cases. Like when you look at the recycling industry, I think if there was more awareness of what actually happens inside factories, of what happens all the way down to the landfill, there's a high likelihood that this problem wouldn't exist, and it may be very similar to the problem. Maybe you watched a documentary, Seaspiracy, where we're having a lot of issues with creating a sustainable ocean when it comes to fish and marine life. So do you believe things like Web3, blockchain, cryptocurrencies are a potential solution to solve the transparency problem? How big do you think the transparency problem is? And do you think sustainability and blockchain, which is, let's say, technological transparency, do you think these fields or industries will merge in the future? What's your take on this?
Interesting question for me, because back in my hedge fund days, we were mining Bitcoin when it was $300 to $600 a coin. So
Nice.
we're very familiar with that kind of world. I don't, blockchain is the first operating system for sending assets through the internet. Bitcoin was the first app on that operating system. There are other operating systems that are far more efficient on a transaction per second basis, far more energy efficient than constantly, counter verifying across all these disparate nodes. They weren't thinking energy sustainability when they came up with blockchain. And so all these apps based on that operating system is what everyone's wrapped around in their head. And ultimately, there are other ledgers that can go with, well over 100,000 transactions per second, 500,000 transactions per second. We're not seeing that type of scalability in the blockchain space. And so I think there will be evolutions to the crypto world. And ultimately, crypto is speculative. And carbon is real. And so I feel that mining for carbon is going to be bigger than crypto. I know it sounds like crazy talk but I'm dealing with being there, learning about the beginnings of it all, seeing the energy waste from the mining and mining all this stuff, and the huge amount of energy demand that could be siphoned off to other areas and to help create more renewables and all this stuff. So ultimately, I think that there's far more energy efficient ledgers that will replace blockchain. And then there will be other apps on that operating system for transferring assets over the internet. And how it evolves and what we're doing, the market can remain irrational far longer than I can remain solvent betting against it. So I'll always be keeping a good eye on it, because it is transformational. It's just not sustainable. So anything that's not sustainable isn't going to last from an energy, inputs and outputs and from that standpoint. But I think that there are some opportunities within that space that will drive innovation and be the stepping stones to the next operating systems, ledgers, and platforms for companies around the world.
So am I accurate to say that you seem to be, or maybe, or you are, um, in terms of blockchain, a revolutionist rather than an evolutionist? So you believe that, oh, we need to go to a different technology than blockchain is going to be the one that kind of, let's say, solves the transparency problem. And that leads me on immediately to ask about, I don't know if you're familiar, it's a pretty modern coin, right? Or pretty modern blockchain, Solana, for example. What do you think of a blockchain like Solana? So do you think Solana, do you favor, of course, with Ethereum and Bitcoin, I know all about the energy problems, all about the transaction fees, but Solana seems to be able to tackle, at least theoretically, a lot of these problems on the scale that's on right now. What are your thoughts on Solana?
That's my example in my head. I was thinking Solana as I was talking about within that blockchain space. There will be drivers of innovation, like Solana that will drive further this sustainable evolution of blockchain as a basically a ledger or operating system for transferring assets over the internet, whatever they be, contracts or otherwise. But from the standpoint of mining for crypto is pure speculation. Mining for carbon is real. I mean, because you're made of carbon, I'm made of carbon. Everything around us is carbon.
Yes,
it's tangible, and we know it's real. And so, and also from the standpoint of a currency, we already know that a currency backed by carbon can exist because the US dollar has been backed by oil, which is a hydrocarbon, since the 70s. So we already know that a currency backed by carbon is a very good case study of its power. And so ultimately, we have to just shift from a hydrocarbon-backed currency to a biocarbon-backed currency. And so I think that that's probably where the opportunities lie in the crypto space of a biocarbon type of framework.
Very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. So super cool. I'm going to think about this for sure. And one thing I want to discuss, because we didn't really do it at the start. So there's no formal introduction. I will do a little pre-recording to introduce you, but I think it also would be very useful for the audience to learn a bit more about who you are and what you do and why you came on the podcast today. So if you want to just tell us a bit more about yourself.
Sure. I'm the director of ESG and sustainability for Gravitas Infinitum. We're an impact holding company. And I came from 20 years in the hedge fund industry, dealing with, really brilliant trade thesis and traders, and relaying that trade thesis to investors and matching that intellect and kind of matching those opportunities with people. From a trade thesis standpoint, going from a linear extractive kind of make waste economy into a circular regenerative economy is the biggest opportunity in the history of mankind. So trade thesis wise, this is a no-brainer. But you still have the people that are going to be like, when they had whalers going out for whale oil, and then they discovered hydrocarbons, and then people would be like, there's no replacing whales. Let's just keep making whale oil. And then everyone's like, oh, well, there's no replacing hydrocarbons. We have to keep doing that forever. I was like, well, we have, hydrocarbon processed hydrocarbons piling up 2 billion tons a year in our waste streams and our landfills. That's just storage. We could go right in there and turn that into renewable fuels. And then, because people don't realize that, for every ton of trash that they're putting in the ground, there's 35 tons of atmospheric waste going up. We just don't see it. It's invisible. So there's a big, we have to address the things that we can see, and that's the easier addressable problems. But addressing the things that we can't see in our atmosphere that are going to slowly choke the life out of all living creatures on this planet is a serious matter. And so the solutions have to mirror the size of the problem. And so that's why I think that the biggest industry in the world, beyond crypto, beyond the internet, is going to be planet repair. And converting carbon, renewable, both waste carbons and atmospheric carbon. It's still waste. It's just, atmospheric is going to be massive. It's going to be transformational for multiple generations, and our future generations are going to rely on it. So, but from the top, I just want to say that Gravitas Infinitum is an impact holding company. So we have Carbotura, which is, waste to materials at the nanoscale level. But we're very industrial size, large scale, scaling that around the world. Our other for-profit service is T4L, which is Transportation for Life, which is a US-based nationwide EV subscription company, all inclusive. So all the charging, all the battery, all the tires and maintenance and registration and insurance all get kind of bundled into a single package. And so it just makes getting electric vehicles cheaper, faster, more efficient. And so when they want to swap a car, they can swap a car. We hold the car for a whole 20 years, and then we recycle the materials of the car. The whole car gets recycled. So it's fully pushing that, circular economy narrative. And then our other initiative is Hot Planet Repair Team, which is a nonprofit we formed. And we've got volunteers and members all over the world that want to untrash the planet. No BS, no greenwashing. No, it's not for policy advocacy or lobbying. It's for just pure untrashing. And so we all joke that, we're janitors without borders.
That's a good one.
So that kind of encapsulates where we are right now with Gravitas Infinitum, and I spend a lot of my time speaking on the Carbotura factor, but I also deal with a lot of the strategic relationships of Gravitas and all of our initiatives.
Amazing description. Oh, wow. First of all, let me say, I think you're living like the life that I would, when I get to your age, if I become like you, I think it's a massive success for sure. Yeah. So I'm very inspired, to tell you the truth. So I really highly appreciate, obviously, this conversation. It's an amazing experience for me. And I would like to ask you a question specifically when it comes to Gravitas Infinitum. So you said that sustainability is going to be the biggest industry in the world, right? So specifically around that, when you ever since you started to pitch to investors the total addressable market, right, what is the figures you've been telling them, if you don't mind sharing, and did that figure change over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it has changed. I put it this way: for a while, at least for Carbotura, it was a constant chase for investors. And what had happened was that we got all the funding we'd ever needed. So now we're 100% financed. All we need are long-term waste contracts with municipalities or waste management companies. And so I found myself transitioning from, after 20 years in the hedge fund industry, always, looking for cash and mirroring that opportunity and finding quality investors, is that now I was hunting for trash. I had never done that before, and it was like, I'm in new ground here. I don't know. I know there's a lot, but I don't know where it is. I've seen a few landfills, but now we're like talking about landfill mining and all this stuff. So it's a different animal for me. But what I try to do is, you know, identify the problem and try to replace myself whenever I can. And so I found, you know, all the funding that is, you know, possible really with our sovereign group, sovereign advisory group. And now it's just a matter of scaling and finding the municipalities and the decision makers that are trying to figure out what to do with these mountains of trash that we're all choking on and leaching into our water streams and into our atmosphere with this methane leaching, methane emissions. And so we've got now it's just kind of a campaign of bringing that awareness. Who's going to be at the top of the list of priorities for municipalities that would like to have a virtual landfill and benefit from those multi-generational revenue streams, and then the implementation, because it takes some time, you know, anywhere from like 12 months really to, you know, 24 months to get up to full scale for like a 2,000 ton a day type of production elimination of waste. So that's kind of the challenge is that, I mean, not necessarily a challenge, it's the risk. The risk is that we're not acting fast enough to slow down the train that we're all on before we hit the wall that we all know we're going to be hitting, because we're in like a thermal runaway event right now. And there's a big difference of hitting a wall at 135 miles an hour and hitting a wall at 35 miles an hour. We all know it's going to hurt, and there's going to be a lot of mess. But at 135 miles an hour, we're all done. At 35 miles, I was going to be, you know, there's going to be a lot of survivors and a lot of people to, you know, pick up the pieces and make the most of a bad situation. For right now, I think a lot of it is, you know, out of sight, out of mind for a lot of the decision makers, but they're starting to have their feet held to the fire on disclosing their, you know, scope 3 emissions. You know, that's going to be a game changer for realization of financial risk being, you know, climate risk and what they're doing. And I actually look at even our defense systems around the world. You know, we spend so much money on all these war machines. Climate change doesn't care about borders. And, you know, if climate change is a national security threat to all countries, what are their defense departments' responsibilities to defend against it? Because typically these defense departments are not liable or engaged or part of the decarbonization narrative. They're kind of excluded from that. And I'd like to see, you know, that transition because, you know, what's their responsibility to defend against climate change if that's a national security threat? And what's their footprint?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah. So
what's the carbon footprint of war? I mean, I think we maybe think that we're all advanced beings now, but we're not too far from the cave if we're still battling over, you know, tribal scenarios where we're a human race, and, you know, that we're all one planet and one species, and we're effectively kind of negatively affecting all living creatures on the planet. So I think we've got to all come together, eat some humble pie, get to work, and start untrashing the place. We've had a 200-year party, and it's like our parents are coming home.
Yeah,
we got to clean up a lot of trash. We are in trouble.
You're very funny. Oh wow! So I want to add something to that. So I don't know if you're aware. You might have seen them on my LinkedIn, on my page. My social media name on TikTok and now also on YouTube, because I started to move to YouTube with my content, is Filip The Terran, and Spotify actually. It's Filip The Terran, and the reason why it's Filip The Terran is because of everything that you just said. I mean, like, this is I live and breathe for this. For me, the biggest problem that humans have, and it goes even beyond climate change, in my opinion, is the fact that we we fear other humans who just have some minor different characteristics, like different language, slightly different skin color, and this is why we have nations, and this is why we have conflict, because the team X has these characteristics, is here, believes they're different than team Y. Team Y believes they're different than team X, and then rather than working together, we have a conflict over resources, and we live in this like a geopolitically competitive world, which I think, in my opinion, is probably not even the best setup for the prosperity of even those players who think that they're more prosperous because of this setup. Like any superpower, frankly, like a really good criticism would be, for example, the USA. I love the USA. I think the USA is amazing, but the USA definitely has this kind of competitive geopolitical approach, right? And you could always justify that that's necessary because other countries do the same. But I call myself Filip The Terran because Terra is Latin for Earth. You might be aware. I think Gravitas Infinitum is Latin, I believe. So I try to, and actually my agency, I'm changing the name of my education agency, where I obviously, as you know, I educate about any technology, any progress that's helping to create a more sustainable and more united tomorrow. And I'm calling that actually Terra Academy. So everything that I built on my own outside of Tree Nation, I always try to brand it like it's for the planet, like it's for the people of the planet, because this is the number one problem. I believe that I'm a massive optimist. I'm a massive optimist. I'm a techno utopian. Probably maybe like yourself, actually, from everything that you've said. I really believe that with technology we can solve all our problems. I think it's easy to think something's impossible when you don't even try. You know what I mean? So I really think that as we try, we find that we can solve more and more things, and any solution, any new thing that we do is actually technology, right? So I'm a massive believer in humanity. I love humanity. I think we're going to have a utopia ahead of us, and we're nearly there, but we need to really make sure that we don't take it for granted that we've already won, because actually there's a lot of work that has to be done. And to finish off, basically, when we go to Mars, I believe that will be the time. Like, I think all the stage is slowly setting for this evolution of human culture, to start viewing ourselves as either Terrans, if you want to use Latin, or Earthlings, which I find a bit cringe, which is why I don't use it all the time. I just don't like it as much. Earthling, I think it's a strange name. What do you think about this topic?
Well, I kind of put it this way: like if we consider New Zealand as like a small world for all the Maoris that live there, they were warring tribes and clans for generations. And then Captain Cook came, discovered, and they realized after that engagement that they had to stop being a warring clans and come together to become a Maori nation. And so ultimately we're kind of going to do a bit of the same thing as humanity, is because once you are confronted with conflict that you're not prepared to handle, you have to come together and collaborate. And so we're all going to start coming together to collaborate to address climate change on a whole global basis. And so I think this transition, and I've said it before, that it's going to be the great collaboration, because that's what it's going to need to take to get out of the mess we've made for ourselves. And I do believe there is some sort of potential utopia to capture from this, because we are entering an era of abundance, because there's carbon everywhere, in our waste streams, in our solid and liquid waste streams and atmospheric waste streams, that we can reprocess into the raw materials of the next stage of modern civilization. And we're talking graphene, 3D printing, graphite that's carbon negative, and mining our atmospheric and waste stream materials for advanced, semiconductors, supercapacitors. I mean, advanced materials, solar, wind, all of that. I mean, even For transportation, it's just going to be, a game changer. And everything we do, see and touch, it takes some time, but you think about the $11 million per minute of subsidies that the fossil fuel industry is getting. This carbon market is the beginnings of subsidizing the counter side of that. And it's going to get bigger and bigger. And eventually it'll be bigger than the oil and gas industry. So the sooner that happens, the better. But, I think it was 2 years ago, ExxonMobil had $145 billion in write-downs, stranded assets. That's a big whack, but they've made up for all of that as soon as we start declaring war, oil prices shoot up. The blowback from all of that is now that it creates even more of a demand and profit incentive for renewable energy and renewable materials and renewable alternatives to fossil fuels. And people don't want to be, hit with that liability of a kind of a petrodollar controlled world, because, then they're at risk. If a war breaks up and there's a disruption in supply chains, all of a sudden, inflation goes sky high. Everything costs more. And it's a tax on, the most vulnerable people.
Definitely. And do you see potentially in the future? I think you actually, I already know the answer because you told me at the start, but you believe that in the future we will have the currency will be backed by something that is maybe like a renewable source of energy or carbon, as you said.
So, it'd be carbon. I mean, we know it's real. The gold-backed currency worked for a great while. I mean, it was 1944 to 1973 was a gold-backed currency. All the G7 countries did phenomenally well. And then from there, it ended up being, when they decoupled from gold, they engaged the petrodollar in the 70s with OPEC. And then that did basically, you had to buy, U.S. treasuries to buy oil. But you have to be, basically back the foreign policy of America inadvertently just to buy oil because you're buying the U.S. treasuries, but it's still a carbon-backed currency. So eventually, as this kind of rivaling currency wars go on, or a race to the bottom of all of the fiat currencies, devaluing themselves, lockstep to the dollar to some extent. The United States is phenomenally good at exporting debt and inflation. And so we've got to start transitioning our economy to what made it great. And I think that there's some huge opportunities for transformation, because that's just an unsustainable set of parameters for an economy to be built around. And it's going to take some time for that transition to happen. But I mean, ultimately, we're in the right place because we're in that kind of sustainability mindset where anything that what we're doing is unsustainable. If it's unsustainable, it can't last forever. So something's going to replace it. We just, we know that it's going to be, and I feel that it's going to be a carbon-oriented currency. And I think that it'd probably be, it could very well be a carbon credit. There's a group out of Australia that are trying to create a central bank-backed, carbon credit. So, I think it might have to be, we all hit a wall pretty hard, and then it'll be like a post-World War II scenario where all the major countries get together and say, we have another Bretton Woods meeting. And everyone gets together and says, okay, well, let's do it with the mindset of sustainability rather than the mindset of control.
That's amazing. I really do, and I hope that's going to happen. I'm aware that we're probably running out of time now because we're like over 45 minutes. So there's plenty of things I would love to speak with you about. We can definitely do this again if you like. I've really had a great time. One thing I would like to finish off to ask, because I really plan to learn this in this podcast, but I didn't get to ask you yet. So can you explain exactly what a bond is? You know, especially in terms of a holding company. You say that Gravitas Infinitum has green bonds. Can you just educate me on what this is, please?
Well, it's funny because there's been like $1.5 trillion in green bonds issued, and some of them have been carbon neutral targets, but the majority of all of them have been doing nothing but wafting more carbon into the atmosphere. So you figure, a green bond should actually be carbon negative. But in our evaluation of the market, we didn't see any. So with Carbotura having our biocarbon facilities, being the most efficient carbon capture system on the planet, we realized that we actually had a carbon negative bond because of its long-term ability to capture atmospheric carbon. But ultimately, a bond is a private corporate debt agreement. In Europe, you have very low interest rates, so it's a kind of a challenge to find bonds that are attractive, have an attractive yield. We had such a huge success with our issuance in the fourth quarter. We actually stopped paused the green bond offering because we had so many material events happening within our underlying operating companies and initiatives that we paused it. And we're doing some significant updates and upgrades to that offering, and perhaps even separating it for the bankers, because they are so transactionally oriented. They just want to have something, one thing to focus on and not other things. So we might just, compartmentalize them out and feed them to the investment community one at a time. We're still weighing that out, but ultimately a bond is a corporate guarantee to pay. Ours was 8% coupon with a 2x conversion at the end of 5 years. So it was very attractive to not only have a high yield, but also a conversion to equity for the long-term holdings of the underlying assets, being T4L and Carbotura, as well as to some extent, but not really because it's a nonprofit, but the hot plant repair team. But that's just a phenomenal initiative that I think everyone should be involved in, including you, Filip, and the opportunity for, bringing awareness to all the tree planting that's going on and help support those initiatives of planet repair.
I'd love to. I'd really love to. And I think we should really talk about that. I would love to work with you. There's so many ways that we could potentially collaborate. So I mean, this is the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really hope you'll come again in the future. So again, thank you, Tyler. I learned a lot. You're a fascinating individual, and I'm honored to have had this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the pleasure.
Ciao, ciao.
Cheers.